Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Usually I say that and people are quiet right away. This is more of a kind of a rock and roll crowd, I think. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the John Adams Institute and Lebowski Publishers. Thank you all very much for being here. My name is Russell Shorto. I'm the director of the John Adams Institute, which typically brings mostly American speakers to Amsterdam and sometimes to The Hague. This year, our lineup has included Robert Reich, who was Bill Clinton's labor secretary, who talked to us about the evils or the dangers of supercapitalism, and Madeleine Albright, the former US Secretary of State, who gave us her memo to the next president. Steve Cole, the New Yorker writer, talked about Osama bin Laden. Christopher Hitchens talked about atheism. Martin Amis about global terrorism. There is a presidential election of historic proportions looming. The global economy is teetering. The world has a number of crises going on. I don't think that I will steal any of his thunder if I tell you that we can expect to have him tonight sort out most, if not all, of the major crises in the world today. David Sedaris is a man who needs no introduction, therefore we will provide one. And in fact, I will introduce his introducer. Tim Overdiek is known to many of you, I'm sure. He was for many years the US correspondent for NOS. Then he was the UK of NOS. Tim, welcome home. Good luck tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, our Master of Ceremonies, Tim Overdiek.
Thank you, Russell. When I moved back to Holland after having been away for 14 years, one of the things was looking for Americans, and I stumbled upon the website of the John Adams Institute. So I think I was one of the first people to actually buy tickets for this event when I noticed it was here. And then I got to know you, and you invited me to be, on the stage here with David Sedaris. So, man, am I privileged. Good evening. We're here tonight, I think, to become engulfed by David Sedaris, to be drawn into a world alight with almost absurd realism and aflame with lively wit. For those of you unfamiliar with his work, be prepared to be engulfed by waves of laughter. I myself first experienced the power of David Sedaris' humor through contagious, spontaneous combustion while watching my wife, Jennifer, read. And she is here too, and she was very happy when we got tickets too. Normally, my wife, a solemn, quiet reader, stretched out on the couch or tucked into bed, she slips into a kind of literary coma for hours on end. Her only sign of life is turning pages or shifting her body to accommodate the cat on her lap. Then, one day, I heard her cackling in the living room, a hilarious shrieking, and I kid you not, I saw my wife actually fall off the couch laughing, struck down by David Sedaris, seriously. The story in question was, probably not surprising, the Santaland Diaries, where Sedaris describes his adventures working as a part-time department store elf in New York at Christmas time. The embarrassing costume, the irritating co-workers, the whiny customers, his own distress at the ridiculous phoniness of this annual ritual. During dinner, by the way, we learned about another Christmas celebration in Japan. We'll probably go into that. We'll save that for later. But the seasonal miracle on 34th Street has not been the same for our family, Dutch-American, ever since. So thank you for that, David. After reading the Santaland Diaries for myself, I couldn't stop thinking like, oh God, am I glad Sedaris didn't grow up in Holland. What would he make of Sinterklaas and Zwarte Piet? Then, as I was doing my research for this evening, I stumbled upon David Sedaris on YouTube in a clip entitled 6 to 8 Black Men. I'll leave you to finding it yourself, David Sedaris, 6 to 8 Black Men, in which he painfully dissects our own holiday traditions from an outsider's perspective, making us see not only the humor in it, but also some uncomfortable truths. This is the hidden, quiet strength, I think, of Sedaris' wicked cleverness. not only the humor in it, but also some uncomfortable truths. This is the hidden, quiet strength, I think, of Sedaris' wicked cleverness. Once you finish laughing or get yourself back up on the couch, in my wife's case, you recognize this is not simply comic relief in essay form. Sedaris routinely serves up portions of his own personal experience and dissects them mercilessly, finding those things we can both laugh at and recognize immediately in ourselves. Even if we didn't grow up in a big Greek American family in deepest North Carolina or work as an elf in Macy's or ever find ourselves in any of the situations Sedaris describes so well. So, how to introduce him? I was looking for some tidbits in a book I bought at the American Book Center, which is a literary exploration of Sedaris' work by a professor of English at the University of Iowa. Are you familiar with that book? You are. Well, yeah, but do we really want to go into comparison of our guest of honor with the French author Marcel Proust, British poet Alexander Pope, or Oscar Wilde? Probably not. So I could quote David Sedaris from his own work, in particular, When You Are Engulfed in Flames. What's the Dutch title again? I just saw it first, I forgot. Anyway, buy it, it's funny. And introduce him as a man with completely flat feet, his words, some impressive calves, haven't seen him yet. As a man, and again, I'm only quoting the writer here without an S. But that wouldn't do him justice that wouldn't do him justice to me either. Apparently, he tends to get very nervous when meeting strangers. He sweats a lot, he describes in his book. And as he describes in one of his essays, so let's make sure we welcome him as his literary friends. After all, we are indeed very grateful to be here in this Dutch living room of laughter, I hope, tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, David Sedaris.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. I sure appreciate it. I was going to start by reading, because it's so difficult to find your way around here, I was going to read a story from the book called Keeping Up. My street in Paris is named for a surgeon who taught at the nearby medical school and discovered an abnormal skin condition, a contracture that causes the fingers to bend inward, eventually turning the hand into a full-sized fist. It's short, this street, no more or less attractive than anything else in the area, yet vacationing Americans are drawn here, compelled for some reason to stand beneath my office window and scream at one another. For some, the arguments are about language. A wife had made certain claims regarding her abilities. I've been listening to tapes, she said, or perhaps all those Romance languages are pretty much alike, so what with my Spanish, we should be fine. But then people use slang or ask unexpected questions, and things begin to fall apart. You're the one who claimed to speak French. I hear this all the time and look out my window to see a couple standing toe to toe on the sidewalk. Yeah, the woman will say, well, at least I'd try. Well, try harder, damn it. No one knows what the hell you're saying. Geographical arguments are the second most common. People notice that they've been on my street before, maybe half an hour ago, when they only thought they were tired and hungry and needed to find a bathroom. For God's sake, Philip, would it kill you to just ask somebody? I lie on my couch thinking, why don't you ask? How come Philip has to do it? But these things are often more complicated than they seem. Maybe Philip was here 20 years ago and has been claiming to know his way around. Maybe he's one of those who refused to hand over the map or refused to pull it out, lest he look like a tourist. The desire to pass is loaded territory and can lead to the ugliest sort of argument there is. You want to be French, Mary Frances. That's your problem, but instead you're just another American. I went to the window for that one. and saw a marriage disintegrate before my eyes. Poor Mary Frances in her beige beret. Back at the hotel, it had probably seemed like a good idea. But now it was ruined and ridiculous. A cheap felt pancake sliding off the back of her head. She'd done the little scarf thing, too, not caring that it was summer. It could have been worse, I thought. She could have been wearing one of those striped boaters shirts, but as it was pretty bad. A costume, really. Some vacationers raise the roof. They don't care who hears them. But Mary Frances spoke in a whisper. This, too, was seen as pretension and made her husband even angrier. Americans, he repeated. We don't live in France. We live in Virginia, Vienna, Virginia. Got it? I looked at this guy and knew for certain that if we met at a party, he'd claim to live in Washington, D.C. Ask for a street address, and he'd look away, mumbling, well, just outside D.C. When fighting at home, an injured party can retreat to a separate part of the house or step into the backyard to shoot at cans. But outside my window, the options are limited to crying, sulking, or storming back to the hotel. Oh, for Christ's sake, I hear. Can we please just try to have a good time? This is like ordering someone to find you attractive. And it doesn't work. I've tried it. Most of Hugh's and my travel arguments have to do with pace. I'm a fast walker, but he has longer legs and likes to maintain a good 20-foot lead. To the casual observer, he would appear to be running from me, darting around corners, intentionally trying to lose himself. When asked about my latest vacation, the answer is always the same. In Bangkok, in Ljubljana, in Budapest and Bonn, what did I see? Hugh's back, just briefly as he disappeared into a crowd. I'm convinced that before we go anywhere, he calls the Board of Tourism and asks what style and color of coat is most popular amongst the locals. If they say, for example, a navy windbreaker, he'll go with that. It's uncanny the way he blends in. When we're in an Asian city, I swear he actually makes himself shorter. I don't know how, but he does. There's a store in London that sells travel guides alongside novels that take place in this or that given country. The idea is that you'll read the guide for facts and read the novel for atmosphere. A nice thought, but the only book I'll ever need is Where's Waldo? All my energy goes into keeping track of Hugh, and as a result, I don't get to enjoy anything. The last time this happened, we were in Australia, where I'd gone to attend a conference. Hugh had all the free time in the world, but mine was limited to 4 hours on a Saturday morning. There's a lot to do in Sydney, but first on my list was a visit to the Taronga Zoo, where I hoped to see a dingo. I never caught that Meryl Streep movie, and as a result, the creature was a complete mystery to me. Were someone to say, I left my window open and a dingo flew in, I would have believed it. And if they said, dingoes, our pond is completely overrun with them, I would have believed that as well. Two-legged, four-legged, finned, or feathered, I simply had no idea, which was exciting, actually. A rarity in the age of 24-hour nature channels. Hugh offered to draw me a picture, but having come this far, I wanted to extend my ignorance just a little bit longer, to stand before the cage or tank and see this thing for myself. It would be a glorious occasion, and I didn't want to spoil it at the 11th hour. I also didn't want to go alone, and this is where our problem started. Hugh had spent most of his week swimming and had dark circles beneath his eyes, twin impressions left by his goggles. When in the ocean, he likes to go out for hours, passing the lifeguard buoys and moving into international waters. It looks as though he's trying to swim home, which is embarrassing when you're the one left on shore with your hosts. He really does like it here, I say. Had it been raining, he might have willingly joined me, but as it was, Hugh had no interest in dingoes. It took a solid hour of whining to change his mind, but even then, his heart wasn't in it. Anyone could see that. We took a ferry to the zoo, and while on board, he stared longingly at the water and made little paddling motions with his hands. Every second wound him tighter. And when we finally landed, I literally had to run to keep up with him. The koala bears were just a blur, as were the visitors who stood before them, posing for photos. "Can't we just," I wheezed, but Hugh was rounding the emus and couldn't hear me. He has the most extraordinary sense of direction I've ever seen in a mammal. Even in Venice, where the streets were seemingly designed by ants, he left the train station, looked once at a map, and led us straight to our hotel. Oops. An hour after checking in, he was giving directions to strangers, and by the time we left, he was suggesting shortcuts to gondoliers. Maybe he smelled the dingoes. Maybe he'd seen their pen from the window of the plane. But whatever his secret, he ran to them. He ran right to them. I caught up a minute later and bent from the waist to catch my breath. Then I covered my face, stood upright, and slowly parted my fingers, seeing first a fence, and then, behind it, a shallow moat filled with water. I saw some trees and a tail, and then I couldn't stand it anymore and dropped my hands. "Why, they look just like dogs," I said. "Are you sure we're in the right place?" Nobody answered, and I turned to find myself standing beside an embarrassed Japanese woman. "I'm sorry," I said. "I thought you were the person I brought halfway around the world. First class." A zoo is a good place to make a spectacle of yourself, as the people around you have creepier, more photogenic things to look at. A gorilla pleasures himself while eating a head of iceberg lettuce. And it's much more entertaining than the 40-something-year-old man who dashes around talking to himself. For me, that talk is always the same, a rehearsal of my farewell speech. Because this time, buddy, it's over, I mean it. I imagine myself packing a suitcase, throwing stuff in without bothering to fold it. If you find yourself missing me, you might want to get a dog, an old fat one that can run to catch up and make that distant panting sound you've grown so accustomed to. Me, though, I'm finished. I will walk out the door and never look back, never return his calls, never even open his letters. The pots and pans, all the things we have acquired together, he can have them. That's how unfeeling I will be. Clean start, that's my motto. So what do I need with a shoebox full of photographs? Or the tan-colored belt he gave me for my 33rd birthday, back when we first met, and he did not yet understand that a belt is something you get from your aunt. And not from your boyfriend. I don't care who made it. After that, though, he got pretty good in the gift-giving department. A lifelike mechanical hog covered in real pigskin. A professional microscope offered at the height of my arachnology phase. And best of all, a 17th century painting of a Dutch peasant changing a dirty diaper. Those things I would keep, and why not? I'd also take the desk he gave me and the fireplace mantle, and just on principle, the drafting table, which he clearly bought for himself and tried to pass off as a Christmas present. Now it seemed that I would be leaving in a van rather than on foot. But still, I was going to do it, so help me. I pictured myself pulling away from the front of our building, and then I remembered that I don't drive. Hugh would have to do it for me. And well, he should after everything he'd put me through. Another problem was where this van might go. An apartment, obviously, but how would I get it? It's all I can do to open my mouth at the post office, so how am I going to talk to a real estate agent? The language aspect has nothing to do with it, as I'm no more likely to house hunt in New York than I am in Paris. When discussing sums over $60, I tend to sweat, not just on my forehead, but all over. 10 minutes and 5 minutes in the bank and my shirt is transparent. 10 minutes and I'm stuck to my seat. I lost 12 pounds getting the last apartment, and all I had to do was sign my name. Hugh took care of the rest. On the bright side, I have money, though I'm not exactly sure how to get my hands on it. Bank statements arrive regularly, but I don't open anything that's not personally addressed or doesn't look like a free sample. Hugh takes care of all that, opening the icky mail and actually reading it. He knows when our insurance payments are due, when it's time to renew our visas, when the warranty on the washer is about to expire. I don't think we need to extend this, he'll say, knowing that if the machine stops working, he'll fix it himself, the way he fixes everything. But not me, boy. If I lived alone and something broke, I'd just work around it. Use a paint bucket instead of a toilet. Buy an ice chest and turn the dead refrigerator into an armoire. Call a repairman? Never. Do it myself? That'll be the day. I've been around for nearly half a century, yet still I'm afraid of everything and everyone. A child sits beside me on a plane, and I make conversation, thinking how stupid I must sound. The downstairs neighbors invite me to a party, and after claiming that I have a previous engagement, I spend the entire evening confined to my bed, afraid to walk around because they might hear my footsteps. I do not know how to turn up the heat, send an email, call the answering machine for my messages, or do anything even remotely creative with the chicken. Hugh takes care of all that. And when he's out of town, I eat like a wild animal. The meat still pink with hair and feathers clinging to it. So is it any wonder that he runs from me? No matter how angry I get, it always comes down to this. I'm going to leave, and then what? Move in with my dad? 30 minutes of pure rage, and when I finally spot him, I realize I have never been so happy to see anyone in my life. There you are, I say. And when Hugh asks me where I have been, I answer honestly and tell him I was lost. Thank you. Sorry. I was going to read a story here that wasn't in the book. And I think it'll be evident when I read it why it wasn't in the book. No, it's just a difference between something out loud and something on paper. And it was written for a radio show that I do things for. And they did a show called Innocents Abroad. And I think I was the only person who wrote anything from it who actually lived abroad. And I don't think that the producers understood that this is something that everyone who lives in another country has to deal with. In the last semester of my final year of college, I signed up for a class titled Art and Politics. The course catalog made it sound interesting, but once we got started, I could see that I had been misled. Part of the problem was the teacher, who was gray-haired and bearded and in his late 50s. Sobel, I think his last name was. To say that he was not a gifted public speaker would be putting it mildly. Neither did he know much about contemporary art, at least not the kind being bought and sold in New York, and that, to most of us, was the only kind that mattered. What this guy mainly knew about were murals, the sort done by poor people with spray paint. He'd drive to the west side of Chicago, photograph an underpass or the outside of a rundown school, and bring the slides to class. Then he'd project them onto the screen and proceed to talk until the darkness of the room and the dull cadence of his voice put most of my classmates to sleep. I found him as narcotic as everyone else did, but what kept me awake, and on my toes even, was the anticipation of certain words, one of them being Latino. What we see in many of these displaced Latino cultures, he'd say. He took an undeniable pride in Chicano as well, but his real showstopper, the one that made the hairs on my arm stand up, was Nicaragua. I couldn't get enough of it. At the end of every class, he'd flick on the lights, ignoring the students who yawned and stretched and shielded their eyes against the sudden brightness. Are there any questions? Yes, I'd say. In that No More U.S. Intervention mural, what country specifically do you think the artist was talking about? Well, that would most clearly be Nicaragua. Then he'd look around the room, ask if there were any further questions, and frown a little at the sight of my hand, back in the air and waving. Yes, I'd say, me again, listen, this might sound beside the point, but which Central American country do you think grows the best coffee? He scratched his beard. Costa Rica? Well, who's second best then? Well, there's El Salvador, certainly, but me personally, I would probably go with Nicaragua. Why do you ask? Just curious. Certainly, to a Spanish-speaking person, Nicaragua is pronounced Nicaragua. It wasn't the word itself that amused me, but the sound of it coming from certain mouths. Mouths most often that were nothing if not selective. You never heard such people ordering enchiladas. But if that was the name of a revolutionary leader, if Los Burritos Grandes was a mountain range amongst which toiled and oppressed peoples, well, that would be different. I think of all this now because I have to. Living in another country, I'm constantly having to decide how to say things. Take this dinner party I went to. There were 18 guests, and Hugh and I were the only Americans. I sat between a judge and a dentist. Double paranoia for an illegal immigrant with teeth you could open cans with. But these were kind and interesting people who went out of their way to put me at ease. The subject of language school came up over dessert, and when the dentist asked me where I had studied, I said Paris. If the party had taken place in America, or if the person asking the question was a native-born English speaker, I'd have answered Paris, because it's queer to say Paris out of context. No more pretentious than, say, Nicaragua, but it's always viewed that way, probably because they have better stuff in France, shoes and palaces and the like. Sometimes Hugh and I, or my American friend Kristen and I, will speak French amongst ourselves, but it's always the weird tourist French we hear so often in the shops and restaurants of our neighborhoods, French that's spoken as if it were English. Donne-moi un coup de fil, et nous pouvons faire des courses ensemble demain. D'accord? I should add that I am in absolutely no position to criticize anyone's French, especially when it comes to pronunciation. What I can criticize is the decision to speak it in the first place. A case in point would be this house guest we had in Normandy over the summer. an American who'd rented a car in Nice and was traveling across the country. Have you ever been to Tours? He asked. To Tours? No, Tours, he corrected me. It's on the Loire. Near Nantes. Never been, I said. This is the same guest who, on his second day, decided to speak nothing but French. Not the flat, jokey kind, but the Nicaragua kind. This in front of his wife, who speaks no French at all. I walked into the kitchen, and at the sound of his, "Ah, David, qu'est-ce qu'on va faire aujourd'hui?" I thought, oh, for the love of God. Do we really need to do this? I'm in my pajamas and haven't even made coffee yet. When I look back on that weekend, what really shames me was my response. Asked in Nicaraguan French what we were slated to do that day, I looked out the window and said, "Io tengo des ne." This is Nicaraguan Japanese for nice weather, isn't it? "Excusez-moi," our guest said. "Mais je ne comprends pas ce que tu as dit." He said that he hadn't understood me, and rather than explaining, I apologized. "Sumimasen, demo watashi mo wakarimasen," which means, sorry, but I don't understand either. Now here was this poor wife having to listen to two languages she couldn't make sense of. And she hadn't had any coffee either. People are super impressed when they think that you speak Japanese, and completely without license, I basked in that admiration. My response to the next question was, "Watashi tachi no oki otoko no ko Washington ni sundemasu." Gosh, the wife sighed. I just feel so unsophisticated. What I'd actually said was, "Our big boy lives in Washington." It's one of the phrases I'd memorized off an audio instructional program that someone had given me. After working my way through 27 CDs, I went to Tokyo for 3 months and enrolled in school. That said, my Japanese is primitive, just enough to try on clothes in a department store or get a few laughs from a supermarket cashier. Showing off is what you were doing, he would later say. And rather than admitting that he was right, I said that I'd been driven to it, which in a way was true. What really set me off was when the guest started correcting me. Bear in mind that he lives in the United States and just picked up his French, took no classes whatsoever. After slamming my pronunciation, he tried to bust me on definition. Like, for instance, we have all these wild rabbits in our yard. Hugh put in a vegetable garden, and now it looks like they're filming an Easter commercial. I mean to say that these things are everywhere, and so bold. At first, he'd run into the woods at the sound of a door opening. But now, if you throw a shoe at them, they'll scamper for a second and then regroup to chew on the laces. We wanted to hate these rabbits for eating up all our plants, but then they're so cute. What are you going to do? Like most couples, Hugh and I tend to divide the tasks. He replasters the walls of the attic, and I take dried up bees and dress them in suits of armor made of tinfoil. He fills out the mountains of paperwork sent by our insurance company, and I decide what to call the various creatures that wander into our house or yard. Generally, I tend to stick with American names, normal ones like Sheila or Ronnie. Phil is always good, as is Curtis and Beth. Something about these rabbits, though, encouraged me to try something new. Not just French, but Nicaraguan French, as that was the only way to capture their insolence and bravado. The main one, for example, the one who's been eating our food the longest, I named Chagrin. What does that mean exactly? The wife of our guest asked. I told her that the word was the same in French as it is in English, and that chagrin means sorrow. Actually, it means regret, her husband said. Well, sorrowful regret, I told her. And what's that rabbit's name? She pointed to another, smaller one. That would be carrelage. Wait a minute, her husband said. That means tile, like you'd put in your bathroom or kitchen. I know that, I said. Well, you can't call a rabbit tile. In French or English, what the hell kind of a name is that? A cute one, I told him. A third rabbit hopped into view, and before the wife could ask, I told her that its name was chômage. You mean chômeur, her husband said, and he turned to his wife. Chômage means unemployment. And chômeur is an unemployed man, so that would be the rabbit's name, unless, of course, it's a female, in which case it would be chômeuse. By this point, I'd had about all of this that I could take. It's my yard. The rabbit was my intruder, and I was free to name him whatever stupid thing I wanted, be it a noun, a verb, even an adjective, if I felt like it. Oh, look at Runny, I could say. It appears that he and Moist are going to pay a visit to their old friend, Screened-In Patio. Looking back, I wasn't upset about the rabbit so much as our house guest's French, which was a good 20 times better than my own. Making it all the harder is that he was a natural, a sort of genius, perhaps, who could look at a word once and hold it in his mind forever. I've made it sound as if his speaking was a pretension, but come on, the guy was on vacation. He was in France and he wanted to practice. It's not his fault that I'm so easily threatened. I felt so bad after he left that I named a rabbit after him. Thank fucking God he's gone. Isn't the most welcome presence in the garden. But as I often say to Hugh, he's definitely the quickest. And see, that doesn't work out on paper because it's just tour, and you don't know that it's tour or Nicaragua, and to try to write it that way would just seem gimmicky. So it's one of those things that really on paper just doesn't work. Right now I'm writing a book, and it's a book of, I'd like to call them fables, but my morals are a little sketchy. But all of the characters are animals, and it's going to be an illustrated book, and they're all like fairly short little stories. So this is one of them. The cat had a party to attend, and went to the baboon to get herself groomed. What kind of party? The baboon asked, and she massaged the cat's neck in order to relax her, the way she did with all her customers. Hope it's not that harvest dance down on the riverbank. My sister went last year and said she'd never seen such rowdiness. Said a fight broke out between two possums, and one gal, the wife of one of the other, got pushed onto a stump and knocked out 4 teeth. And they were pretty, too. None of this yelliness you find on most things that eat trash. The cat shuddered. No, she said, this is just a little get-together, a few friends, that type of thing. Will there be food? The baboon asked. Something, the cat sighed. I just don't know what. Of course it's hard, the baboon said. Everybody eating different things. You got one who likes leaves and another that can't stand the sight of them. Folks has gotten so picky nowadays, I just lay out some peanuts and figure they either eat them or they don't. Now, I wouldn't like a peanut, the cat said. Not at all. Well, I guess you just have drinks then. The trick is knowing when to stop. That's never been a problem for me, the cat boasted. I drink until I'm full, and then I push myself away from the table. Always have. Well, you got some sense then, not like some of them around here. The baboon picked a flea off the cat's head and stuck it gingerly between her teeth. Take this wedding I went to last Saturday, I think it was. A couple of marsh rabbits got married. You probably heard about it. The cat nodded. Now, I like a church service, but this was one of those write-your-own-vows sorts of things. Neither of them ever picked up a pen in their life, but all of a sudden they're poets, right? Like that's all it takes is being in love. My husband and I wrote our own vows, the cat said, defensively. Well, sure you did, the baboon told her, but you probably had something to say, not like these marsh rabbits carrying on that their love was like a tender sapling or some damn thing, and all the while they had the squirrel off to the side, plucking at a harp, I think it was. I had a harp player at my wedding, the cat said, and it was lovely. I bet it was, but you probably hired a professional, someone who could really play. The squirrel, I don't think she'd taken a lesson in her life, just clawed at those strings, almost like she's mad at him. Well, I'm sure she tried her best, the cat said. The baboon nodded and smiled, the way one must in the service industry. She'd planned to tell a story about a drunken marsh rabbit, the brother of the groom at last week's wedding, but there was no point in it now, not with this client anyway. Whatever she said, the cat disagreed with, and unless she found a patch of common ground, she knew she was sure to lose her tip. You know, she said, cleaning a scab off the cat's neck, I hate dogs. Simply cannot stand them. What makes you bring that up? The cat asked. Just thinking, the baboon said. Some kind of spaniel walked in yesterday asking for a shampoo, and I sent him packing. I said, I don't care how much money you have. I'm not making conversation with anyone who licks his own ass. And the moment she said it, she realized her mistake. Now, what's wrong with that? The cat said. It's good to have a clean anus. Why, I lick mine at least 5 times a day. And I admire you for it, the cat said. But you're not a dog. Meaning, on a cat, it's classy, the baboon said. There's a grace to it. But a dog, you know the way they hunker over, legs going every which way. Well, yes, the cat said. I suppose you have a point. Then they slobber and drool all over everything, and when they don't get wet, they chew to pieces. That they do, the cat chuckled. And the baboon relaxed and searched her memory for a slanderous dog story. The collie, the German shepherd, the spaniel she claimed to have turned away. They were all good friends of hers and faithful clients. But what would it hurt to pretend otherwise and draw that fine line between licking ass and simply kissing it? And I was just going to finish here by reading a few little things from my diary. I've been just keeping a diary forever, and it's awfully helpful when it comes time to write a story, because sometimes there's things in here that I can use. And anyway, May 6, 2004, London. The English edition of my book was released today, and I began my week of publicity by sitting for a half a dozen regional BBC interviews, all of which were conducted long distance and sent down the wire from the main broadcasting house in London. None of the hosts had read my book, so to keep things moving, I asked them what their town was like and listened as they ticked off the various splendors of Leeds or Manchester. The one exception was the host of Radio Jersey, who described the island as, quote, an offshore pile of money with alcoholics clinging to it. November 19th, 2007, London. Yesterday's Guardian included a profile of Ricky Hatton, the current welterweight champion of the world. He can talk about anything, but I especially like him on the subject of his father, a man who stands only 5 feet tall and looks, his son says, like he just fell off a fucking key ring. April 4th, 2007, Paris. I looked up the place where we're staying in Athens and found the following description. Caressing the foot of Lycabettus Hill, the Periscope Hotel is set amidst a flurry of history in the capital of the cradle of civilization. Kolonaki is the name given to the neighborhood which envelops the hotel and is one of the most famous in Athens. At the confluence of the city's culture, art, design, fashion, and business, this hotel allows you to step to the authentic rhythm of the Athenian pulse. A hip experience you will never forget. Listed under amenities, beneath direct dial telephone and minibar, is written different types of pillows. Oops. Oh. October 15th, 2007, Canton, Michigan. I met a flight attendant at last night's book signing, and during our brief conversation, she taught me a new term. You know how a plastic bottle of water will get all crinkly during a flight, she asked. Well, that happens to people, too, to our insides. That's why we get all gassy. All right, I said. So what me and the other gals will sometimes do is fart while we walk up and down the aisle. No one can hear it on account of the engine noise, but anyway, that's what we call crop dusting. April 4th, 2007, Paris. In need of jokes beginning with, a man walks into a bar, I looked on the internet and found the following. A ham sandwich walks into a bar and orders a drink. Sorry, says the bartender, we don't serve food here. A guy with dyslexia walks into a bra. A pair of battery jumper cables walks into a bar. The bartender says, you can come in, but you better not start anything. A bear walks into a bar and says, I'd like a beer and... a packet of peanuts. The barman says, why the big pause? A baby seal walks into a bar. What can I get you? Asks the bartender. And the baby seal answers, anything but a Canadian club. June 10th, 2004, Dublin. In the exotic gift section of Brown Thomas department store, I came upon a small packet of tea leaves, the label reading, Rare Chinese Oolong, hand-picked by specially trained monkeys. I thought of the price, $20 per gram, and then I imagined a group of unemployed peasants. Goddamn monkeys coming over here taking our jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very, very much. There are microphones in the audience, so we definitely get there. Hopefully not too long from now. But maybe a couple of things first to warm him up after reading this, hearing this. A man of shaky morals? What kind of wily beast would you like to have?
No, that
been?
one was the clearest of any of them. You know, I mean, I don't want to plot those out, those animal stories.
Yeah.
And that one just sort of happened organically, you know, like about kissing ass and licking it. And I thought, oh, good. That's good. That's something to remember. But then the other ones just got sort of, oh, I don't know. Because I'm not a plotter. You know, I start off with two animals and I just sort of see what happens, and it was just kind of a lazy way to get back into fiction writing. And because everyone knows what a cat looks like and everyone knows what a baboon looks like, so I don't have to describe them. And so you can just kind of get right to it. And they're just types of people. But the types of people haven't changed. You know, I mean, I could sit down and read Aesop's fables and it's still, you know, about trying to bite off more than you can chew, or not being able to forgive. But I don't even want to look at those. I guess a better word for them might just be like little stories about animals. But I set up rules for myself, like no animal can have a name. You know, it's a cat and the baboon. Like one of them I wrote about a mouse who goes to prison, a cat who goes to prison and joins an AA program in prison, right? And there's a mouse who's the head of the AA program in prison. But like the cat doesn't want to eat the mouse or anything like that. They're just two alcoholics in prison. And I just started with the cat and the mouse, and I thought, okay, they're in prison. And then I realized that they were alcoholics. They were both different kinds of alcoholics. You know, like the mouse is getting sober, and the cat just doesn't think that it's really for him. And I enjoyed it, you know, because I thought, look at me, and then it turns out that the cat's best friend was turned inside out. And I thought, I didn't know that when I got up this morning. You know, I guess it's just the joy of writing fiction, I suppose.
What type of animal are you? What type of animal would you be? Would you like to be?
What kind of animal would I be? I mean, it would be great to be able to fly. Yeah, to be able to fly. And did you read that book, Freakonomics?
No.
Okay, it was written by two New York Times reporters, and someone gave it to me for Christmas, and I finally sat down to read it, right? And there's a chapter about how your name will kind of define who you are, right? And there's a man in this book who had a son, and he named his son Winner, thinking, okay, how can he go wrong? And then he had another son, and he named that son Loser, okay? And as of the book's printing, Winner had been arrested like 36 times. And Loser, who wisely goes by Lou, was a very successful police detective, right? And then there's a woman in there whose daughter, she gets very upset when people mispronounce her daughter's name, which is Shatid, okay? Spelled Shathead, okay? Now, that's just shithead, okay? There's no Shatid to it. That's how you spell shithead, and that's the daughter's name. So we had a window box. I have a window box outside my office in Paris, you know, just for flowers, but the flowers died. And then I went back over the summer, and there was a pigeon in the window box, and it flew away, and I looked and I saw 2 eggs. And anyway, so I decided the pigeon's name was Shatid, right? And then these eggs hatched. And they were really ugly and really greedy, and she vomits in their mouth that's how she feeds them. Just wretched lives, just right from the beginning. You know, like when you look at a pigeon on the street and you know you see so many with a clubbed foot, and you think, what happened? Like, just so many of you. You know what I mean? It's like India. It's like what I imagine going to India would be like. So just watching them made me think, oh, I should write a story about pigeons. So sometimes I just sit around, you know, I'm around the animals, and that gives me, I'm sorry, to answer your question, what animal would I like to be? I think a bird. So you could
A bird.
A bird, especially here, would be good because no one has curtains. So you could just fly up and watch people have sex and fly over into the other window and...
And shit on people's heads.
Uh-huh.
Your stories, you read one that you said was not meant to be printed. But when I read your books and your stories and your essays, and most of them have been on the radio, but a lot of them just for print. But I can just see you write them. How do you do? Do you actually write them reading aloud? There is such a connection between how you write them on paper, but also being able to read them aloud.
Well, for that particular story, a producer on Ira's show said we're doing a show called Innocents Abroad, right? So first I wrote an animal story about two birds who winter in Guatemala. And they're American, and they said, every summer we go down there, there are hundreds of thousands, but do you think any of those birds have learned to speak English? Think again. So again, there are types of people who... And so I wrote that, and it just got completely out of hand, and then I wrote that right there. But again, and I don't mean to sound like a baby about this, but I was the only one who lives in another country. Like, when you live in another country, that's a big part of your day-to-day life. You meet other Americans, and you have this little pissing contest over who pronounces words best. And the French or whatever, the Dutch, they just go about their lives, and they don't understand that you're, like, having this little battle with someone else from St. Louis. So I wrote the animal story, and then I thought, actually, that's sort of what I wanted to talk about. So I sat down and wrote that. And I guess writing about Nicaragua, like I'd always wanted to write
what
about...
country?
Nicaragua. I'd always wanted to... That had always stuck in my mind, and that was something like from, 1985 I took that man's class. But it just seemed a good way to kind of get into it, because I thought maybe a lot of people had that teacher, and then you can just sort of lead from that to living in another country. You need some kind of a gateway, for some people, and then so they can stand in your shoes. Like, it's not like you put your shoes on the floor and say, step into these. Like, they'd say, oh, I don't know, I don't really like shoes like that, or, I have bunions, or whatever. I mean, sometimes you have to unlace the shoes, and you have to make them attractive to people, and then they'll step into them, and then you can go wherever you want in the story, because they can understand what you're talking about, I suppose. So that always seems like the first part. And then, again, I don't...
I'm just trying to picture you writing this stuff. 1 page a day, I read somewhere? Max?
Pardon?
1 page a day.
Oh, that was a couple books ago. I was under a deadline, and so I thought, okay, I have to write a finished page a day, which meant at the end of the week I had to have like 7 pages. But that was like in 2000. No, I sit down and write like 4 hours a day. But I count anything as writing. I count writing in my diary as writing. I count writing a letter as writing. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, because they put so much pressure on themselves. Like, if you sit down and if I were to sit down and say, what I write today is going to be in the New Yorker, then it's a guarantee I'll never finish it.
Because?
Because then it's under so much pressure, and then you think of all the people who might get the New Yorker. Like, what if, I don't know, like, what if, okay, I don't mean to sound name-droppy, but this is... Okay, but this is the kind of thing that happens to me, right? So my lecture agent calls and says, there's someone in Los Angeles who would like to meet with you when you're there next month. Okay, and then you think of all the people who live in Los Angeles. Phyllis Diller, okay, wants to meet with me. And I said, are you sure she's not dead? But she's... So what if Phyllis Diller gets a New Yorker? Right? That's just something I didn't think about. So you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to write this for the New Yorker, and it's going to go to Phyllis Diller's house in Bel Air. Then you're really going to freeze up. And that was...
You have to tell us about visiting Phyllis Diller right now. Bel Air.
Well, see, that's the kind of thing, too. You can't really write about that kind of thing because it just makes you, because then no one's going to invite you to their house, if you do that. Oh golly. No, so I try not, I mean, what I mean is if you sit down every day and if you put too much pressure on what it is that you're going to do, then I don't know. I'm really good with a deadline. Like I don't miss deadlines. But I find it best for me to sit down. And I don't remember, it's a quote someone said, to sit down every day without hope and without, no, that doesn't sound good. Without, I mean, you just sit down every day and say, okay, I'm gonna sit down and see what happens today. But without...
Is that easy?
Pardon?
Is that easy? Sit down and just let it come? How do you decide what's fun? How do you decide when you have done a short story? You rehash it, you read it aloud, because you do read it out here. When do you decide it's done then?
I'm going on a tour I leave on Sunday, and I'm going to 30 cities in the United States in 31 days. And it's a lecture tour, and that means that I read out loud for an hour in theaters. And I have 8 new stories that I'm going to start with. And I don't know, maybe none of them will work. But I believe in them today. I believe in them, right? And one of the reasons I don't want to give them to my editor at The New Yorker is if I do, and if he says, oh, we're only going to take like 2 of them, then I'm automatically going to think, those other 6 stories suck. And I'm not even going to want to read them out loud. So I read something out loud, and then I go back to the hotel, and I rewrite it, and I read it, and rewrite it, and read it, and rewrite it. And some stories I've got like different versions of, or different bold, there's certain things that it might be a cheap laugh, and I need to hear it, and I need to see what it sounds like. And so then I have another version without it. But it's just going to, I want to learn as much as I can on my own before I give it to my editor. Because that's happened before, and he said, oh, we need to cut this. And I'll say, actually, that's the biggest laugh in the whole story. And people really respond to that. So I like being able, there was a story, the New Yorker asked me to write something about food, and so I did. And then I wrote it, and it was published, and I went on tour, and I read it out loud, and it was like, God damn it. I wish that I had worked this in front of an audience before it was published. Because it's just, maybe on the page it's okay, but out loud it's just, ugh.
That's the ultimate test. It has to be tested first before you can.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like, I prefer to test it first.
Why? Isn't it funny enough on paper already as it is?
I'm not a good judge of that.
Is it
Like, I'm not a
insecurity
good
about what
judge.
you write?
No, but I'd prefer, okay, like in that last story, when it started off, it wasn't, I'm trying to think, like, I don't think I had, I didn't have the dressing bees in suits of armor. Which, in truth, I've only done once.
That's what.
But that's the biggest laugh in the whole piece, and I didn't have it in there. And I read it out loud, and I thought, something needs to go there. And on paper, I don't think I would have realized that something needs to go there. And I certainly wouldn't have realized that needs to go there. So I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to, I feel like it's an opportunity I have, and that I would be foolish not to use that. Like, I've finished this book tour, right? I started in June, and so I was in North America and South America for 6 weeks, right? So I don't ever, and then I read that tonight. Okay, I'm never going to open that book again. I might have to for the paperback or I'm going to Germany. But after that, I'm not opening that book again, okay? I was sick of that a long time ago, because all those stories I read and then went back to the hotel and rewrote and read and rewrote. So I've read them out loud so many times.
So you've gone back to the US after living abroad, France, the UK. What's it going to be like for you to come home, or is it not a homecoming to you? It's just homecoming to your audience?
You know what? One thing, I go back to the United States, and I like that I understand it in a way. Like I understand. Like I understood why George Bush got elected a second time. Do you know what I mean? Like French people would try to get me to explain it to them. And I thought, well, I think you have to be from there, like to understand how such a thing could happen. You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like I understand things in a way that I don't understand things in England, and I don't understand things in France. That said, I like not understanding, and I like wrapping my mind around things, and I like asking people about it, and I like getting it wrong. It's bad to get it wrong on paper, you know, to go and act like you understand this country that you've only been living in for a few years. But I like being a foreigner, I think. And because I like being this sounds goofy, but because I like being a foreigner, it feels good, I think, sometimes to go home. Like where I don't have to worry about running my mouth. Like, you know, like you just run your mouth. You lived in the United States. You just run your mouth sometimes. You run your mouth to a cashier. And you say at the airport, are you sick to death of 20s? How many 20s do you think you've gotten today? And she'll say, you know, if I even thought about it, I made enough 20s. If it was a 20s and they were stairs, I'd climb those stairs and it'd be like the goddamn stairway to heaven. You know, like, and you go, mm-hmm. Like, whereas in France, I just don't feel that comfortable, you know, like running my mouth. And even in England, I feel like a donkey. Like, hee-haw, hee-haw, you know, like, I just feel like I should have, like, big teeth this big and
So where do you feel home?
Where do I feel at home? Well, I mean, I guess it's just in the United States is where but I don't have a home there. I guess I just feel like, I mean, I guess it's a place where I belong, but that doesn't mean I have to live there just because I belong. You know what I mean? I mean, you lived in another country, and I guess I just always thought, like, if I could live in another country, why wouldn't I? I mean, I lived in the United States for 40 years. Like, why? And if I can work wherever I want, and if Hugh can work wherever he wants, you know, like we went to Japan for 3 months. I mean, and granted, we're very lucky. We could go to Japan for 3 months, and he could go with me, and you know, we could both work at home. But why not? Like, what else are you gonna do? I mean, that's what you're supposed. That's what life's for. I always thought so. And I like moving. I like packing. I'm really, really good at it. And there aren't that many things I'm good at, but I'm really good at packing.
I think I speak on behalf probably of everybody. We feel so bad for Hugh somehow. I think we love him, but we feel bad for him. You understand that?
You feel bad for him because...
Well...
No, I understand. I know exactly what... And that is exactly how I feel. You know what I mean? Like, I am so, so grateful. Hugh and I have been together for 17 years. And if he ever breaks up with me, it's going to be... I will be clinging to his ankle. I am so grateful. So incredibly grateful that he's with me. And I shower him with gifts, and I tell him constantly. But I wouldn't break up. Like, and do what?
He told me before we came here that he's been buying Christmas presents in February already for Hugh.
I start my Christmas shopping in February. But, you know, the people I know who hate Christmas, it's like, well, of course you hate Christmas. You go out 3 days before Christmas with all these people who are just like yourself, yes, who are unprepared, and, yes, and the stores are crowded, and the lines are long, and of course you're going to hate it. But if you start in February, then you shop at your leisure. I bought I don't know, I bought a big Christmas present here today, and I bought another present I'm going to keep for myself, and then another present that it just, 2 Christmas presents. I bought a present for Hugh, a present from my lecture agent, and then a little thing for myself, and then something that, you know, every now and then you think, I just got to buy it. You know, I'll figure out who to give it to later, but if I don't buy this, it's going to haunt me for the rest of my life. So, and you know, and there's always birthdays, and I don't, you know, I'm a very shallow person, and I don't know what to do when I go to a place and there's nothing to buy. I was just in Australia, and it's like, get me out of here. The people were lovely. They really are. But there's nothing to buy. And you go to the grocery store, and you might as well be in a grocery store in America. There's not even anything like, oh, look at that. It says Jimmy, but it's a Band-Aid. You know, it's not even... There's nothing. So I went from there to Tokyo, and there it was like a parody, like a commercial, you know, like I go into the store and then I come out, you know, I go in the revolving door empty-handed and I come out like that, and I have to take a taxi. That's how you say, that's how you get a cab in Tokyo, you say, taxi. I'd have to take a taxi back to the hotel and unload my booty. And this is a good, you know, maybe it's different if you live here. You would grow immune. That's what happens. You live in a place and you grow immune to its charms. But there's good shopping in this town. The problem is the stores are always closed.
Who wants to use the mics? Please. Somebody has to go first.
You've written quite a bit about your family, your sisters, I think mostly. How does your writing grab them, your family?
How does my writing grab them? Well, whenever I write about anyone in my family, I give it to them to read first, and I ask if there's anything they want me to change or get rid of, because I don't want to expose anybody's secrets, and everybody's got them. Sometimes I'll read a book and I'll think, like I read this book that I really liked recently, and it was called The Foreskins Lament. And it was by a guy named Shalom Auslander, and he wrote about his growing up in an Orthodox Jewish household in New York State. And at one point he talks about going to his parents' bedside table, and he finds a dildo and a copy of Shaved Asian, okay, magazine. And I thought, I bet he's not talking to his parents anymore. And he's not. And it's actually much harder to do that stuff when you are talking to them. But I always thought, I suppose, that my motives were transparent, you know? Like, I always thought that I wrote about my family with obvious affection. Like, I would never write, I love my sister Lisa, because it just sounds queer, and it's just not the kind of thing that I would say. But I think my affection is evident, but writing just gives you the illusion of control. You know, so I'd write about my sister, and then people would say, how's that neurotic sister of yours? And it's like, what do you mean neurotic? Or people would say to my sister, I can't believe what your brother wrote about you. Or, you know, what if after you exposed your sister, I said, you know that my sister has a parrot. And that's what you know about my sister. But that was unexpected, and that's what became a problem. You know, that my older sister will go to a dinner party and someone will say, well, I know all about you. I've read about you. And they don't know all about her, but they act like I'm in cahoots with the reader against my sister. So that's just something. I have one sister who didn't ever want me to write about her, and that's fine. But the others, they're still fine with it.
You're the second oldest in a family of 6, right? younger sister,
Yes,
Amy,
I have a brother and 4 sisters.
accomplished actress, writer, Amy. What are your family reunions like?
What are what?
Your reunions when you get together as a family, is it crazy or is it just boring around a table eating turkey for Thanksgiving?
Oh golly. I always considered myself very lucky that way. You know, when I was growing up, my father would we would eat dinner in the dining room, and my father would have the TV on and the news in the next room. And he would be eating dinner like, shut up. God damn it, shut up. He would be watching, and then in his underpants, right? and then the second he finished, he would leave. And then the rest of us would sit around the table with my mother for hours and hours every night, just sitting around the table laughing. And my mother's dead now, but when my sisters and I get together, and my brother, it's still the same thing. I mean, we just sit around and truly enjoy one another's company. And I've always considered myself very lucky that way. You know, and I guess maybe it's because of that that always seemed like the most important relationship to me. You know, a family relationship. And if I meet somebody, that's what I usually want to know. Like, do you have brothers and sisters? And I went to Greece recently on a book tour. And one thing I liked was that every journalist I met in Greece, you could count the minutes until they mentioned a family member. Like, you'd say, what'd you do last night? Oh, my sister and I went over to my mother's house, and then my brother came over later. And all of their stories involved their family. And I like that.
Does it feel exploitative to write about them so much?
I always thought, I made up a rule a long time ago that it was really bad to write about your children because children want privacy a lot, you know, or they reach an age when they want privacy. But everyone else is fine. No. And because I don't have children, it worked out in my favor. No, well, like my older sister, and I think this is a story I told yesterday when I met with a group at the treehouse. My older sister told me this story lately, and her refrigerator broke, and she called a repairman to fix it. And she said, I didn't quite trust the guy. There was just something about him I didn't trust. So I didn't want to leave him alone. So the guy laid out all his tools, and he started working, but she didn't want to leave him alone in the kitchen. So she stood at the counter, and she started reading a magazine, and then she said, you know, I decided I would check my phone messages. So I picked my cell phone off the counter, and the guy gave me a dirty look. So I put the phone back down, and then I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is my house. You know, I can check my messages in my own house. So she picked the phone up again, and he gave her another look. And then she said, I knew if I left the phone on the counter, I was just going to obsess about it. So I put it in my pocket. And then the guy finished, and then packed up his stuff, and she walked him to the door and thought he would get into his truck and leave. And instead, he stood there on the front stoop, and he said, are you going to give me my phone back? So I'm so lucky that my sister doesn't write, because anyone who writes would say, that's gold, right? But I said to her, oh, can I write that down? Can I write that down? And she said, oh, sure. So, but there are other times, like, and again, it's because people have their secrets and they don't. I think that's the difference, too, is that people in my family know what's funny. Lisa knows that's funny. She's the first one to laugh at it. So it's not making... I mean, I always think that I know that difference, but if I don't know the difference between what they think is funny and people laughing at them, then they get a chance when I give it to them. But that said, I think it must be kind of creepy to have someone around all the time who says, can I use that? What are you doing with that?
I have a question. When in a lot of your books, especially in the last one, sort of your history of the writing is running parallel to it, but you never really talk about it very much. Here and there you mentioned that you had a story here or that. When you started doing the NPR things, did you intend to be a writer, and that was something you started to do, or did you fall into the writing and as it went through?
Oh, that's a good question. I started writing when I was 20, and I just started one day. And I'm pretty good at doing the exact same. It was a network of radio stations in the United States, and I was reading in this little place that let people read. My friends and I had organized like a month of silly shows, and I was reading a short story that I'd written, and this guy from the radio happened to be in the audience, and we shook hands, and then 2 years later, I had moved to New York by that point, but he called and asked if I had anything Christmassy that would work for a local radio show that he had. And I'd worked as an elf at Macy's Santaland and kept a diary. And so I just took the diary bits and I recorded them, and he put them on his show, and then he put it on the national show. And it just completely, overnight, changed my life. Overnight. I mean, it was like in a fairy tale. It really was. All of a sudden because not the type of person, I would never have been able to go to someone and say, will you read this story, or will you let me read at your place, or I always had to wait to be asked. And after I was on the radio, then it was like crazy. It was like Harper's Magazine called and said, can we publish that thing you just did? And I'm like, yeah, you can publish it. And the New Yorker called and said, do you think that you would you in any way be interested in writing for us? It's like, you're the fucking New Yorker. Like, what do you mean would I? Like, I would, and whenever they send me a check, it's like, shouldn't I send this back? Shouldn't I add a zero and send it back? So, and none of that would have happened if Ira Glass hadn't put me on the radio. So it makes it easy in a way, because if I ever won an Academy Award, I just have to thank one person.
Ira. Anybody over there?
Sometimes it's hard because you don't want to stand up. Like if you don't have much of an ass. You don't want to get at a microphone because everybody will notice it. So you can just raise your hand if you want to. After you said that, I was going to back up on the stage with your introduction.
Still time, still time.
I guess this is the corner of questions, but with every book you write and with the increasing exposure through this life, you were on The Daily Show a couple weeks ago, do you find that people come up to you more and more and say, hey, I know you, like, do you have any other crazy stuff? Do you feel the pressure of making your stories more extreme or more out there to satisfy the cravings of the public?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I don't, I'm incredibly uncomfortable on television. Like, the perfect thing about radio is that it doesn't matter what you look like. Like, every now and then, and it didn't happen tonight, but I'll be reading in a theater, and there's a light. It's usually dark. The whole house is dark, and there's a light. And I'll look on the podium, and I'll think, oh, my God, that shadow is my head. Like, it looks like the United States. Like, what's going on? And so then you're like this, but you're reading, and you're trying to make it go down. So I'm just not comfortable with a physical. So I'm not comfortable on television. And The Daily Show started after I left the United States. And what's interesting about The Daily Show, actually, is like when you go on David Letterman, there's a pre-interview, right? So a producer calls you when you talk for hours with the producer. And then you get to the show, and there are David Letterman's questions, and your answer is written on paper, right? And you don't have to be verbatim, but if your answer on paper is this long, it better not be that long, or that's when you get cut off. And you don't meet him till you get out on stage. And with Jon Stewart, the pre-interview is 10 minutes long, and the woman says, John might ask you about this, and he might not. And then you go backstage, and Jon Stewart comes into your dressing room, nicest person in the world, and says, let's just continue this conversation on stage. And you go out there, and you're so relaxed. He's completely invested in you being comfortable. It makes a huge difference. And I didn't realize how many people watched that show. So I went on the tour, and I was in airports or, I step out of a cab and I'm checking my fly, and then someone says, "Excuse me, can I have your autograph? I saw you on, I don't remember your name or anything, but I saw you on on the Daily Show." And on the one hand, that's the great promise of America. Like to me, I always thought growing up in America that anybody can be on TV. If you want to be on TV, you can be on TV. And if you really want to be on TV, you can have your own show, right? But that's sort of what it's all about, that you'd be checking your fly and someone would be asking you for your autograph, or you'd be in a restaurant and someone asks you for your autograph. That's supposedly how you know that you have a good life. But you can't really spy on other people if they're spying on you. It just doesn't really work that way. So I was, I don't make a habit of it. I went on there in the beginning of June for the book, and again, I was shocked at how many books he sells. And that really surprised me, too. But do I feel a pressure to outdo myself? I guess, like this tour that I'm going on, you never want to do a bad reading. Like, I really beat myself up if I am bad. There's a story in the book called Town and Country, right? And on the surface, it's filthy. It was a day in my life, it was a day of unprecedented filth. It was just every four-letter word you can think of is in the story, but I don't think of it as a dirty story, right? It's got dirty words in it, but I insist that it's not. Dirty is you saying that you masturbated into your mouth. Okay. Entertaining is you saying that your next door neighbor told you about the time he masturbated into his mouth. Okay. Like, there's a difference, see? And I read this, and I like this story. It's a good, I'm not a big fan of my own stuff, but I think it's a pretty good story. And I went to a college, and I read that story. Now, I'd forgotten that it was Parents' Weekend. I guess someone had told me. And then when I got there, they said, "Oh, remember, it's Parents' Weekend." But then I thought, well, that's good. That's a really... Because how often do you get to sit in a room with your parents and hear the word pussy 18 times? Like, how many times do you get to do that? So I still thought it was a good choice. And I read it, and it went very well. It went over very well. And then I got a letter from the head of the university. "How dare you? And you're better than that. And to read that filth." And then for a second I felt bad, and then I thought, wait a minute, I was there. Like, I know what that reaction was. That was a good show that I put on. So I just thought, forget about her. But I don't want to do anything bad, but it's hard too. Like, I wrote a story a couple of years ago. I came here, and then I learned about Santa Claus, right? And that was gold. That was just...
Why so?
Just hearing, because that's what I live for. And the story, Oscar, I asked Oscar, like, "Well, what goes on at Christmas?" And then, like, the more he told me, and he was just, "Oh yeah, I know, and Santa lives in Spain." It's like, what? "Oh no, we call him Black Peter." And it's like, what are you talking about? But it just happened organically, and it fell into my lap, and to read that story in the United States is to put an egg on a hot griddle. Do you know what I mean? Like, and the reason the story works is because people are so chauvinistic, right? So everybody thinks that their Christmas traditions are completely right. So I'd love to be able to write something like that again. But I went to Spain, where they have crazy Christmas tradition. But I can't even write about that, because then I would feel like that's trying too hard to do it again. And I don't want to be that person who just writes about other people's holidays. But sure, you want to write something But again, if you sit down and if you say, "Oh, I got to write something," unless people fall out of their seat, I'm not doing my job, then you're not going to be able to do it.
Now, your work here is labeled as fiction. In the U.S., it's labeled as non-fiction. Where is it?
Is it fiction here?
Yeah.
I didn't even know. In the United States, it's nonfiction. And there have been people who say, well, it doesn't belong in nonfiction. I only dressed a bee in armor once. And I said that Hugh and I divide the tasks. And that would suggest that I've dressed a lot of bees in armor made of tinfoil. Therefore, that needs to be called fiction. But I would insist that as a humorist, I mean, that's part of my license. It says on my humorist license, on my official humorist license, may exaggerate with wild abandon for laughs. So I would keep it in nonfiction. Like, I don't think enough of it. I guess I write a story and I put it on the scale and I say, okay, 97% of that is true. And that's acceptable for hot dogs. Do you know what I mean? Like that's I mean, that's more than acceptable for cocaine. So I don't think that that's enough. I don't think that dressing a bee in tinfoil one time instead of doing it like 15 times is enough to change that story to fiction. We had the rabbits in our yard. That's what the rabbits were named. That was my teacher. So I would...
Because there's been this whole discussion last year in the U.S. about whether it was nonfiction, the fact-checking, which really bothered you a lot.
Well, I think it's like there's a virus in the United States, I mean, it's interesting to me, all of this came out of that James Fry, A Million Little Pieces, right? The guy wrote a book saying, I'm a fucked up alcoholic. And it turned out that parts of it weren't true. And then everyone said, that fucked up alcoholic lied to us. Well... you can't say he didn't warn you, right? But I think it's interesting, too, like, when you have to say, okay, why is this going on now, right? And if you think that this is a time, in the United States anyway, where the government has told huge lies, just like about Saddam Hussein having the weapons of mass destruction, and that have resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, if you include the other side, right? But Oprah Winfrey didn't call George Bush a liar when he went on her show, but she called this guy a liar because he said he went to jail for 3 weeks and he didn't in his book, right? And you want to keep saying, look up, like to all those people who are, I mean, that doesn't... It's just interesting to me that the detail talk is taking place under like these big clouds of massive lies. And is it because we feel like we can't do anything about those lies? But you only dressed bees in armor one time? So this guy went to North Carolina with my books and he was going to fact check them, right? And I think he was hoping that I had no brothers and sisters, right? And that my mother would answer the door, right? And this stuff was turning out to be true. And he was like, fuck, I got to do something here. So one of his things is I volunteered at a mental hospital when I was 15. And I wrote that the buildings were Gothic. And they are Tuscan Revival. Okay? That was a big point of his article. And another point,
up.
I had written that I went to speech therapy when I was young, and I referred to it as future homosexuals of America, right? Because I had a lisp, and everyone who had a lisp grew up to be gay, right? That I was in speech therapy. He dug up my elementary school principal, who's in his 80s, and said, "Did you round up suspected homosexuals and send them to speech class in the early 1960s?" And of course, the guy said no. So, and then the journalist was like, "Aha!" and that was like a joke. That was a joke, right? But then the article was written, and it was, I do things on a radio show called This American Life. So on the cover of the New Republic, This American Lie, right? And I thought, well, wait a minute, like, you're holding me to the standards of a New York Times reporter, but I'm not a reporter. Like, I've been offered reporting jobs, and I never take them because I say to them, like, look, I can't, that's not who I am. That's not what I do. I'm not interested in writing that way. Plus, like, if you're writing humor, plus the stuff he called me out on, like the worst stuff in the article, stuff I cheerfully told him, you know? So, but it's just that...
Is that the climate that's waiting for you now in the US, where every little lie will be exposed, even as a humor writer?
Yeah, but again, I think of it like a virus, and it'll pass. But like in the meantime, and obviously, I mean, if your books do well or whatever, then you're the perfect target for something like that. But I guess the thing is, like, I've always talked about how much I exaggerate, and I've written about it, and I exaggerate about how much I exaggerate. So it's like this whole gotcha. And it's like, what are you talking about? You got me. Like, I told you that. I've been telling you that for years. Like, why didn't you? And so it's a bit frustrating. But again, I think it's like, and it's not just me. It's anybody who writes anything that's nonfiction. That's what the whole discussion is about now. But if you really want to do that, then do it, right? So then we should say that unless you have a tape recorder on you, at all times, you should not put anything in quotation marks, really. Unless you can prove that somebody said that, then, I mean, let's go all the way. If that's what we're going to do, let's absolutely fact-check every aspect of everything and get rid of quotation marks for things you don't have proof for, and stop writing about, like, do I remember every word that was said to me when I was in the 5th grade? Hell no. I took so many drugs, I don't even... but you approximate a conversation that you had with your dad in the car. Like, I remember my dad saying to me, "I've never cheated on your mother." Like, that stuck out to me because it was just weird, and I didn't know how to respond to it. And maybe he said, "Never once have I cheated on your mother," instead of "I've never cheated on your mother." Or maybe he said, "I've never cheated on your mother lately."
And of course, that ended up in your new book as well, that little remark that your dad said in a car on your way somewhere. Please don't stop writing. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this was a very pleasant evening. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I would, first of all, just like to take my hat off to Tim Overdiek. David Sedaris was here in Amsterdam a number of years ago, and he did a John Adams event, and my first call was to the person who moderated that event, and I said, "David Sedaris is coming," and she said, "No way, it's a thankless job." And Tim did a great job. Thank you very much. A brief commercial. October 5th, here at the Rotherhood, John Adams is co-producing an event with the Rotherhood. Shelby Steele, who, on a very different note, is an American writer who has a book out about Barack Obama. Like Obama, he's the son of a white woman and a black man, and he writes about Obama and a biracial identity. That is October 5th. Please come. My thanks to David Sedaris, to Tim Overdiek, to Lebowski Publishers, and thanks to all of you. David will sign books up here, maybe just for organization's sake. If people want to come this way, the books are for sale if you haven't gotten them out there. If you want to come this way and then kind of go that way, that might work best. Thank you all very much.